Have you ever wondered what happens when fact meets fiction? I think we have the best sellers like the Krishna Key or the Keepers of the Kala Chakra. But that is my only assumption. Can we reimagine India's past through fiction infused with a healthy dose of facts? Let's hear it from Ashwin Sanghi, one of India's best-selling authors of historical and mythological thrills, who is in conversation with Shobhaa, a prolific Indian writer who is recognized as a social commentator and an authority on popular culture. Shobhaa is on the list of the 50 most powerful women of India and has given a new definition to the mass market bestseller with her bold and individualistic stand. Let's start the session with a round of applause.
And welcome. Kolkata is always really good to writers, and I'm hoping this session will be something you remember and take with you, because I am in conversation with one of the most successful writers possibly in Asia.
Thank you.
It's true. I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. And I'm sure with his next book, that will be one of the most successful writers in the world. Look at the numbers. They're just fantastic. So a round of applause for him.
Thank you.
A round of applause for the lovely, amazing team that has put the very first Kolkata Lit Fest on the map. Vinita, Nanya, her team of volunteers, and all the other people who've made every writer and certainly every reader present feel most welcome. So thank you once again. Now I wanted to ask Ashwin, what exactly is a theological thriller? I love the term, theological thriller.
Well, let's start with just the thriller. I mean, I think, so as far as I'm concerned, a thriller, the perfect definition of a thriller is that it's a story where you ask a question at the beginning and answer it by the end. And while, of course, you're making that journey from the question to the answer, you create enough moments of thrills and chills. So that is, in the strict sense, what a thriller is. But now, the question that arises is that what is it that makes the thrill happen? In typical crime thrillers, it's the fact that a crime has been done or it's around the corner, about to happen. But for theological, mythological, historical thrillers, I think the very delicious question is what if? What if this were true? And so that is the starting point of conspiracy fiction. That what if, for example, the events of the Mahabharata were not myth? What if they were real? Or, for example, what if Jesus Christ survived the crucifixion and is buried in Kashmir? Or what if Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose did not die on that aircraft? So for me, the thrill comes from those questions.
You said somewhere that it was your grandfather who introduced you to books at a very early age, and he expected you to write a review of each book he gave to you. Tell us a little about that. What kind of books did your grandfather share? How long ago was it? And what was your first review of a book that he'd given to you like? What did it read like?
So, I must tell you, and I've admitted this many, many times, that I have nothing which can be remotely called a literary background. I grew up in a typical Banya family. It was expected that I was going to get into business. My father used to send me to our office at age 12, where I was supposed to learn the two most important words of a Marwadi, which is debit and credit. I mean, essentially. So that was the training that, you know, we had a Munimji in our office who used to wear a topi, and he would say that why are you wasting time with book reading? Bookkeeping is what we need to focus on. And if you want to read something, then read a balance sheet. But why books? So Nanaji lived in Kanpur. And Nanaji was one of those very strange, rare breed of men who not only was successful in business but also loved reading. And he was multilingual. He spoke in English, Hindi, Persian, Urdu, Sanskrit. So he was truly learned. And so I would go to Nanaji and I would say, Nanaji, this is the problem that Munimji says that I should be focusing on this. And Nanaji had this wonderful way of explaining things and simplifying them down. He said that, beta, remember one thing, you as a businessman are always going to be infatuated by Lakshmi. Lakshmi is going to be a part and parcel of your life. But he said very few people know that there is a quirk of Lakshmi. And that quirk is that Lakshmi is very curious about Saraswati. So in case Saraswati is in a room, then Lakshmi wants to be in that room. If Saraswati gets up to leave, then Lakshmi also wants to get up and leave. So he said the short way of attracting Lakshmi is by attracting Saraswati. So, which probably explains why I look the way I do, because if you notice in Hindu mythology, the deity who sits between Lakshmi and Saraswati is Ganesh. So, and my entire life has been a quest to sit between those two Devijis. But Nanaji was punctilious. He would send me a book, and initially I was not wanting to read, I wanted to collect. So I used to feel excited that one more book has come and it's on my bookshelf. But Nanaji wisened up. He realized that I wasn't reading. So he said, okay, now we are changing the formula. Every week you will write a letter telling me what you have read, whether you liked it, didn't like it, and if you liked it or didn't like it, why? So it was the earliest form of writing a book report almost every week. And the books that Nanaji sent me were varied. For example, I remember reading Autobiography of a Yogi at age 14 by Paramahansa Yoga. I remember reading the Mahabharata retold when I was in my early teens. I remember struggling through War and Peace, probably at 16, 17. So there was a lot of freedom at midnight. So over his lifetime, he sent me more than 400 books.
Where have you housed those amazing books?
Those are beautifully stored, very lovingly, in my study. So my study, in fact, 3 walls are just books. And a portion of one of those walls is dedicated to Nanaji.
Have you started sharing books with your own son?
Loaded question.
Loaded question, he says. Yes or no?
Loaded question. I did share, but nothing came of it. I think the point, my son is 15 years old. His name is Raghuveer. And whenever I pass on an interesting book to him, Raghuveer's view is that, listen, your generation is completely different to mine. And I tell him that, listen, ultimately, it's knowledge. And he says, well, that I can get online. So I get that from Google, and I get that from my... I say, what about the entertainment? So he said, yes, video games are entertainment too. So there is always a ready response for everything. The only piece of fiction that I think he's actually gone through is probably the Harry Potter series, which he actually went through, and that was after having seen the movies.
But tell me, how, as a writer, a contemporary best-selling writer, when you see it in your own home that it's very difficult to get the attention of young people today to read books, is it a challenge for you when you're writing your thrillers? How do you get a young readership to appreciate all the effort and what you do?
I think to a very great extent, it's all about storytelling. And you know this better than anyone else. It ultimately boils down to the story. It's not the words. The words, we can get dime a dozen editors to edit and to recommend better vocabulary or to clean up our grammar. But what they can't do is to tell a story. And the way I like to think about storytelling is that, it was the director, Alfred Hitchcock. He said that the length of a movie is related to the endurance of the human bladder. So, in that sense, a movie is limited in terms of time. I like to think that when I'm telling a story, I don't think of it as writing. I think that there are 10 people sitting in a circle around me, and I'm telling them a story. And that story is very, very interesting. And 3 of them really need to get up and use the restroom, but they don't, because that story holds them. Now, if we can do that, and it's what we call page turning, that how can we make it into a page turner? And it's becoming more and more difficult because our attention spans are going down. There was an interesting study I read which found that the average attention span of a human being in the year 2000 was about 12 seconds. And by 2013 it had dropped to 8 seconds. What was really more terrifying was the fact that in that same year, 2013, the attention span of a goldfish was 9 seconds. So in that sense, we are better off writing for goldfish than writing for human beings. So it's all about getting them to turn the page. And that's what I try and do, because at all age levels, whether it's young, whether it's old, that works.
As a person from a business background yourself, and like what your Munimji told you, that you need to understand balance sheet, and you need to know just 2 words to be a successful human being. Today's young writers are businessmen first and authors next. They start with spreadsheets, they have a business plan in place, and then they figure out the title of the book and the content. How does it work for you?
So, well, the spreadsheet is an invaluable part of the process, and not in the way that you imagine.
Tell us, I'm dying to know. I've never done it, so it's something I can learn.
So for me, the Bharat series, most of my books in the Bharat series start with about roughly 2 to 3 months of ideation, then another 8 to 9 months worth of research on that idea. But once I'm done with that, then I sit down with an Excel spreadsheet in order to actually plot the book.
It is so scary.
It's very scary, I know. And I've been given a lot of grief about it, that, you know, this is so ridiculous, it's so completely non-writerish. But for me, so let's take, for example, a book like the Sialkot Saga. It's about 2 young men, and it follows their lives from 1947 all the way through till 2010. Now, if you see the Excel spreadsheet for that book, every row is a year, 1947, 48, 49, 50. Then the age of each of these 2 characters. What was Arvind's age, what was Arbaz's age? Then, what would they have been doing at that time? Were they in school? Were they starting a business? Had they been arrested for theft? Were they experiencing their first kiss? What was happening in their lives? Then the final column talks about what was happening in India, socially, culturally, economically, politically. The idea being that that is the backdrop. Till the time that I haven't actually plotted out the entire story and I know exactly where it's going to end, I will not start writing.
Do you have a team that helps you do your research? Do you do it all entirely on your own? Is it teamwork?
It is a lot of people. Like, for example, I don't understand Sanskrit. So I'm dependent on a person who's a scholar, and he helps me in terms of being able to get the right nuances of the terms and the words. In addition to that, he helps me with the actual translation of passages, which I want to produce in my book. That is one. Similarly, for example, sometimes I'm unable to do the amount of reading that I actually want to do. A book like the Rosabal line, my very first, involved about almost 40 books. So it was very different that I was interested in that subject. I was passionate about the subject, so I just simply wanted to read. But subsequently, I realized that no, I need someone who can read it and pick up the relevant material for me. So now I have 2 readers who work alongside in terms of being able to put together summaries of the important bits. In addition to that, obviously, there's another set of people for things like social media and editing and God knows what.
But you've done a collaborative, 2 books.
Yes.
With Mr. Patterson,
Mm-hmm.
which were on top of international bestseller lists. Now, how does a collaboration of that kind, a creative collaboration with a top writer, work in real terms? How do you sit down together? Do you make a plot together? Do you say, I'll write one chapter, you write another? I mean, just in terms of the physical effort involved.
I know. So it's actually for, let me take you before the beginning. Before the beginning is because that would explain as to how the collaboration evolved. And so, of course, in India we have arranged marriages. So this was an arranged marriage.
Who brokered it?
So, a good friend of yours, Meru Gokhale. So, Meru was working for a while in London, and next to her office was the office of the person at Penguin Random who was representing James. So, the 2 ladies were having lunch together, and James's representative said that, James wants to write a thriller set in India, but he doesn't know how to go about it because he's so unfamiliar with the terrain. And Meru said that, I have just the thriller writer for you. And so it was these 2 ladies sitting over lunch, figuring out, "Acha, tumhare paas ladki hai, mere paas ladka hai," type of thing. And so that marriage was set up, and then James and I had a long Skype conversation, and James said that, "Look, Ashwin, for the first book, it's better that let the plot come from you, because I don't know the first thing about the way the country operates." So I ended up penning a plot, and of course, when you're working in collaboration, the plot becomes even more important, because you both need to follow the same map. Otherwise, you can't do it. So we ended up, I wrote a plot outline of about 10,000 words, and I passed it on to James. I said, "Have a look at it." And then we went through a couple of conferences, because James does most of his work at that stage. So he'll be like, he's the sort of person who will say, do we need to keep this character alive till chapter 30? Can't we kill him sooner? Or do we need to reveal this now, or can this be revealed much later? So he likes to get into that. So we went through a couple of sessions, and when we had a final plot outline, the first draft was written by James. Now, if he had done the plot outline, I would have written the first draft. So whoever does the plot outline is not the one who does the first draft.
How was your meeting with him the very first time? A lot of this was done over Skype, email,
absolutely.
etc. Did you ever physically meet him? And when you did, how did that work? My plot, your words, etc. Egos, I don't agree with this, I agree with that.
So we never met.
You've never met your co-writer?
We've done probably something like around 20 Skype sessions, but never met.
You've never met to date?
Never. Because the truth is that, frankly, the hero is the story.
But it's amazing that you would co-write a book with someone you've never met.
And in fact, we are going to be doing another couple of novels. And we are going to work exactly in the same way. The second novel that we did, which was not Private India but Private Delhi, the plot outline came from him and I wrote the first draft. Yeah. So by the time that it went back to him, he did the second draft, and so on and so forth. So
it's like a long distance marriage. It's never been consummated.
Absolutely.
In that sense.
It's been consummated long distance.
I see, okay. This is so intriguing. It's just fascinating. I mean, it would be wonderful to be a fly on the wall when you two actually do meet.
Oh,
but you know, there's something like physical, personal chemistry. Two writers meeting, they've done books together, but they've never met. There's a book in there.
There's a book right there. So you know, maybe you could be the fly on the wall.
Why not? It's sounding more and more fascinating. It really is.
And given the fact that there are two crime writers, maybe we could throw in a couple of murders along the way.
Yes, and there could be a woman this time, and with her inputs, and I think it's already sounding like a bestseller. But when it actually comes to credit for the book. Both these books were top sellers internationally.
Yes.
You both get equal credit
Yes.
for, so, and nobody really questions who's written the draft, who's done the plot.
Yes.
None of it matters.
None of it matters.
It's really how many books sell.
Absolutely.
At the end of the day.
Absolutely. So I was very surprised actually, I must tell you, because when the book came, it was first launched in India, and India, both the books ended up within the Nielsen top 10. Then a month later, the book came out in the UK, and I was very surprised to see that both the books ended up in the UK Sunday Times top 10 listings. And then it was a full 6 months before these books were eventually published in the US, because with Patterson, his UK and Europe rights are with Penguin Random House, but his US rights are with Little Brown and Company. So there is always a deal involved in terms of getting the two publishers to see eye to eye on that. But both the books eventually became New York Times bestsellers. So for the first time I realized that there is a cross-border audience for this material. That whether it was the UK, whether it was India, or whether it was the US, we did exceptionally well.
Did your Yale background help you in terms of positioning your books, designing the covers, the marketing of the books? Because all of it today is a very, very important feature of being a writer. You can no longer say, I'm going to write this masterpiece and I'll leave it to the experts to sell.
Yeah.
So you are extremely involved, aren't you, in all of it? The research, the cover design, all of it.
Absolutely. And frankly, I would have it no other way. I see myself pretty much as the CEO of the book. So in that sense, whether it is the title, the choice of title, the final cover design, whether it's even, for example, nowadays every book typically starts with a video trailer. I was one of the first authors to do a video trailer way back in 2008 for the Rosabal line.
Did you invest your own money in that?
So the Rosabal line video is the same video even today. It was done on a Mac using raw footage bought off licensing sites, along with an audio track which was also bought exactly like that. And I think the total budget was something like 10,000 rupees.
No, it wasn't.
It was.
And to get commercial release?
And today, of course, the budgets have changed. So today, for example, a video trailer anywhere upwards of 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs is quite a bit the norm. But at that time, my publishers weren't even sure as to whether the Rosabal line was going to sell even a few hundred copies. The first print run of the Rosabal line was 2,000 copies.
That was the average in those days of a first-time writer.
That's right.
Still is, not much more than that.
Maybe it's gone from 2,000 to 5,000.
That's about it.
Yeah.
But, when you took that leap of faith, you could as well have been just the son of very exceptionally successful business family, and you could just have been sitting around doing what your father has done very successfully. But you did take that big leap. And you've turned it into a very successful business model for yourself. As you said, you're the CEO of your books, and you drive that business. How do you make that? How did you decide that that's what you wanted more than anything else?
So, for me, the transition actually happened because of a simple chance visit to Srinagar. It was the year 2002. There was a wedding happening in the family, actually not the family, but a family friend. His daughter was getting married, and my father said, please go and attend it. And I landed up in Srinagar, and Srinagar was deserted because it was the peak of terrorism. The roads were empty. The Oberoi Palace, the main Oberoi Palace wing was shut down, only the annex was operating. 10 or 15 rooms were operating. When I walked down the passage, I could hear the echoes of my own footsteps, so it was scary. Despite that, the next day, I told the driver, I said, I have to get out of the hotel and I have to go somewhere. I said, take me to any interesting place. and he took me to a tomb which is in old Srinagar, in a district known as Kanyar, very close to Zanakadal, which is the heart of Srinagar. So we walked into that tomb, and I said, "What is so great about it?" Because it's really very, very simple. I mean, it's a squarish structure, whitewashed walls, and in the center of it is the burial of a body, which belongs to the 13th or 14th century, a Muslim Peer called Nasiruddin. So Nasiruddin is much later, because what is fascinating about the tomb is that there is an earlier body which goes back to around the origin of the tomb, which is about 124 AD. So it's about 2000 years old. So that first body, and while Nasiruddin's body is in a Islamic burial, so it's with the head pointing towards Mecca. The other burial, which is the older one, that is in an east-west direction, which is the axis along which the Jews buried their dead, the ancient Jews. So outside the tomb, there is a metallic plate which has a pair of human feet, and on the human feet are points which have been earmarked, which is where the nails for a crucifixion would have been driven in. And you know, some stories, they just completely sort of... I'm one of those who genuinely believes that we don't go looking for stories, that stories find us. This story just found me. And I ended up spending the next 1 year trying to talk to whoever I could about that particular tomb. There was a related theory to the tomb, which was of a Russian explorer called Nicholas Notovich, who visited Hemis in Ladakh sometime in 1887. And out there he came across an ancient scroll which talked about a young boy who came from Palestine, from Judea, to study under the Buddhist masters, and his name was Isa. So I was wondering whether there was a connection between these stories. And I spent the next one and a half years reading. Eventually I decided to write a 40-page thesis, connecting all the little facts that I had discovered. And I gave it to my wife, and I said, "Anu, please read it and tell me what it is." So she read it, and the next morning she says, "Ashwin, congratulations." So I was very pleased. I said, "Okay, that means she's liked it." And she said, "Congratulations, because I think you've just discovered the cure for insomnia." Because it was so utterly boring that within the first 2 pages, I was asleep.
Oh no, that can be so discouraging.
So she said, "Who's going to read this? It'll be one more non-fiction title lying on a dusty bookshelf." She said, "You need to convert this into a story." And that's when I started rewriting all the research as a story. And it was 2005 by the time I actually completed writing it. So it was a 3-year process.
During those 3 years, were you concentrating only on completing a manuscript, or were you also involved with business? Was it distracting you? Were you saying, "What am I doing running a business when I really should be spending all my time writing"?
I kept running business all the way through till the Krishna Key. That was around 2011 or so. So 2011-12. All that while, I kept leading my day-to-day life as a businessman, and then I would come home in the evening, would have dinner with the family, and then would retire to my study. And typically I would write between 10:30, 11 at night till about 1 in the morning.
Now that you're such a mega success, how has your family responded to your work? Do they look at it with different sort of respect? Is there a perspective on what you do? Do they admire you for having walked away from?
You know, I think the shock that emerged, I must tell you, for the life of me, I was so scared to tell my father that I was writing a book. Because I just knew what his reaction would be. And so the first book, The Roosevelt Line, luckily for me, between literary agents and publishers, 47 of them said thanks but no thanks. So I had no alternative but to self-publish The Roosevelt Line. And so when I was self-publishing The Roosevelt Line, I self-published it under a pseudonym.
It was an English name.
Yeah, it was. Sean Higgins, which is a perfect anagram of Ashwin Sanghi. So, but it gave me that cover because no one needed to know. And so, father, family, no one knew except for my wife. And it was another year by the time the self-published work eventually was picked up by Westland to publish in India. And Gautam from Westland turned around and said, Ashwin, can you imagine the culture shock of a press reporter wanting to meet Mr. Sean Higgins, and he walks into a room where you are going to be present, and I mean, he sees this pot-bellied Marwadi businessman. Where is Mr. Sean Higgins? So he said, look, we have to get rid of this. And so when the Rosapal line was eventually published in India, it was under the name Ashwin Sanghi. But that's the time when I had to go back to my father and say this book has come out. And I could see his life and my life flashing before his eyes, almost. I could see tremendous panic in the man. That this was a young man that he had invested the better part of his life training to take over his business, and he was. I think he also had visions, nightmarish visions, of me wearing a khadi kurta and chappals with a jholi, walking out saying that "मैं अब लेखक बन गया," sort of something like that. And he said, "Is this what you want to do?" And I said, Dad, there's no way that I can support myself from the royalties that I'm going to earn, and I don't even know when those royalties will kick in. So whether I like it or not, I'm going to have to continue working. And it was only when I said that he heaved a sigh of relief. That okay, fine, But by 2012, things had changed dramatically. For one, my royalties had become very substantial. More importantly, I was finding that I was so completely involved in my writing, in my lecture circuit, and all of that, that I told him, I said, see, this is not working for me now. And he told me, he said one very interesting thing. He said, Beta, one thing that I gave you was the fact that you could knock on any door and say, I'm MK's son, so please hear me out. And he said, probably that gave you a kick out of it, that my father's name is of importance. He said, but now I go to parties and people ask me, how are you related to Ashwin? And he said, that gives me excitement. So,
I remember meeting your parents at that time.
Yeah.
The first time I met them, they were a little uncertain about your future and said so in a very polite way that like an indulgent parent saying, yes, he's trying something.
He's trying.
And we have to encourage him and so on. When I met them the second time round, their chests were expanded. They were so proud. They were, floating on air, and of course, parents, any set of parents would feel that way.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure your son is going to eventually be feeling the same, though at the moment he'll probably... Has he even tried to read your books so far?
He's read one of my books, which is in the non-fiction space. I have these self-help books called 13 Steps.
13 Steps, which are also bestsellers.
Which are also touchwood bestsellers, but he read the book which I had written on marks, how to get better marks. And and then of course he turns around and says, there's a basic problem in our relationship. And he says this very openly. So I said, what? And he said, everyone compares me to you. So for example, when I submit an essay, I'm told, why is it that Ashwin Sanghi's son will produce this? And so it's unfortunate. I said, look, you don't need to be a writer. I was meant to be a businessman, I became a writer. You have the entire domain open to you. The entire world is your oyster. You decide what you want to do. It's today there are kids who are playing video games and taking YouTube videos of themselves and earning money from that. So millions.
Yeah.
So I said, the entire world is there for you. So why are you worried about whether you can write a one-page essay or not? In any case, during my days in cathedral school, Professor Elisha used to tell me, Sanghi, you have the most terrible grammar. You use commas and full stops as if they're salt and pepper. You scatter them all over pages. So, I mean, you know, I was never a good writer. And even today I'm a lousy writer. I'm just a fairly decent rewriter, but I'm a fairly decent storyteller.
Fairly decent, says this very successful man. I like that. You know, modesty for any writer, any creative person, is always a trigger. When you start thinking you know it all, and you know every book of yours is going to be a bestseller, you're dead. Absolutely. Because there's no incentive. There's nothing.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's good. You must always remain insecure.
When youngsters, particularly at Lit Fests, etc., they come and ask me, they say, what is the one thing that you have as a possible advice for us? I only say one thing, that listen, remember one thing, all the words that flow from pen to paper are not yours, they come from Saraswati. It's a big boon of Saraswati. The moment you forget that, those words will stop flowing. So you're only a medium, just enjoy the blessing.
Now to ask you a slightly political question in this era of Hindutva.
Yes.
Clearly your books have a certain positioning which is in consonance with the political system of the present government. Is it important for writers to have a political direction at all? And do you have one yourself?
Remember one thing, out of the 5 books in the Bharat series, the 3 of those books had the same direction, but they were written during the UPA era. So the Rosabal line happened in 2008, Chanakya's chant happened in 2010, the Krishna key happened in 2012. So if I wanted to float in the direction in which the breeze was blowing, then those books would have had a marked departure from my books of 2016 and 2018. What I do believe, it's not about actually politics, even though that is a subject that interests me immensely, and that's the reason why Chanakya's chant was written. But what I do believe is that from a historical perspective, I feel that, and I genuinely from within, I feel upset that the entire narrative has been unidimensional. So to give you an example, even today our history textbooks talk about the fact that there was an Aryan invasion and that the Aryans who were white-skinned brought the Vedas with them and they brought Sanskrit with them and they drove out the Dravidians. Whereas to my mind, we were talking about a far greater civilization, which was the Saraswati civilization. And in fact, I believe that all of those settlements that happened along the banks of the Indus River were actually part of a broader civilization, which was the Saraswati. Similarly, for example, in the Rig Veda, we have references to the Saraswati River and the fact that she is the mightiest of the rivers. But for the longest time, historians said that, you know what, your Rig Veda talks about the Saraswati, but the Saraswati is nowhere to be found. So therefore, why are we wrong in saying that it is the product, the Veda itself is the product of a different land, that it was composed elsewhere? Luckily, today science and technology is telling us that the Saraswati exists. So now it's time for us to at least present that alternatively. I'm not saying discard the Aryan invasion theory, but I'm saying present also the alternative theory and let people make up their minds for themselves. That is where I have a bit of a problem. And luckily for me, I write in the world of fiction, so which means that to a very great extent, I am able to present something which is a hypothesis and say, listen, this is an alternative. If you feel strongly about it, dig a little deeper. Most of my books have at least a couple of 100 references at the back. So I look at my books as an exploration, that if you are truly interested in the subject, you will dig deeper into that subject using the source material that I have given you.
There are also references in some of your publicity material which talk about what was mentioned maybe in Vedic times, which a lot of our politicians are referring to in ways that have no scholarship of any kind. Head transplants, we thought we'd gone to the moon, we've gone beyond the moon, we've discovered...
Absolutely. No, I think this is the problem with politics. And you know what my definition of politics is, right? Poly, many, ticks, blood-sucking creatures. So many blood-sucking creatures are politics. The point is that you can use anything in order to prove something where you have already made up your mind. What I feel is happening right now is, unfortunately, for such a long time, the pendulum was entirely towards the version of events that was presented by British historians. And now, for the first time, the pendulum, unfortunately, has swung to the other extreme. Where, I mean, for example, for someone like me, I will say, hey, listen, I believe that the myths are not pure myth. I believe that there is some element of history, otherwise we wouldn't have been writing about these stories for thousands of years. That doesn't mean that I take it literally and I expect that 90% of it is true. All of our myths have been layered over the years. But to take an example, when I'm writing the Krishna Key, I'm interested that could the event described in the Mahabharata have actually happened? So I go back to the Mahabharata and I look at the fact that there are astronomical signs pointed out by Rishi Vyas to Dhritarashtra on the eve of battle. Now, someone else thinks like me. His name is Professor Narhari Achar from the University of Memphis. Narhari takes a computer simulation to look at the night skies over Kurukshetra over a period of 20,000 years. And he says, all of these astronomical signs could only happen in 3067 BC. For me, that's a very interesting nugget because it adds to the believability of my fiction. But I make no bones about it. I'm writing fiction. I don't attempt to say that this is fact, and I don't want you to treat it as fact. When I initially became a writer, journalists used to ask me, what is your qualification? You have an MBA in finance, for God's sake. I mean, what is your qualification? I said, you know, when I was growing up, my mother used to tell me that I was a bloody good liar. And that's what I have carried on doing, because we as storytellers tell lies. But the flip side of telling a lie is that if you're going to tell a lie, tell it as close to the truth as possible. And that's where we do our research, to make it sound believable.
That sounds like a fantastic description of why we write at all. That's wonderful. You know, I was just thinking that the three most successful writers today in India, apart from yourself, the other two would be Amish and Devdutt Pattanaik. And all of you, there is a similar kind of a thread.
And Chetan.
I didn't hear that, sorry. I didn't hear that. Devdutt Pattanaik and Amish.
But I must tell you one thing, since I brought up that name, I must tell you one thing, that I bless the writers, in particular you, as well as Chetan. And the reason for that is because prior to the advent of people like you, we did not have a commercial fiction market in this country. So you made it easy for a lot of us.
That's very kind of you.
Which is something which a lot of people tend to forget, that, you know, it eased the way. Because till then, if you were an Indian writer, either you wrote an epic saga, a family saga, or you wrote literary fiction, so you were the next Salman Rushdie, the next Amitabh Ghosh, what have you, or you wrote a non-fiction book on how to prepare the best biryani. I mean, but the idea, I went out into the market in 2005, 2006 looking for someone to publish a thriller, and they said, theological thriller from a Marwadi family, from a Marwadi writer, have you lost it? You've completely lost it, because we would rather read John Grisham and Dan Brown and Frederick Forsyth. Why do we need Ashwin Sanghi? That is what you all changed.
Well, that's very generous of you, but I was asking a specific question about the three of you.
Yes.
I didn't include Chetan in it because his writing is very different.
That's right.
Amish, you and Devdutt
Devdutt.
Bhattanaik, your work relies very strongly on mythology,
Yes.
and also all three of you fictionalize a lot of the mythology in different and magical and wonderful ways.
Absolutely.
And I was in conversation with Devdutt Bhattanaik in Adelaide 10 days ago at a Lit Fest,
Right.
where he talked about mythology being somebody's truth. It may not be your truth, but it's somebody's truth.
Absolutely.
And I thought that was a very wonderful way to put it. And he's also an illustrator, so his depth of knowledge in
It's
terms
tremendous.
of and interpretation of mythology is also something
Tremendous.
absolutely remarkable. So all three of you have done something by making our own mythology accessible to a lot of people who would otherwise not have read mythology per se, just for the sake of reading
Right.
the math. So it's been a fantastic learning experience, even for someone at my age, to be able to delve into your books or Devdutt's books or Amish's books for that matter, and the way you use language and fictionalize a conversation, say between Sita and Ram,
Yeah.
like they're talking slang, they're
Yeah,
talking
absolutely.
today's language and saying,
Absolutely.
hey you guys and stuff like that. It's something very new and refreshing.
But you know, the great thing about our country has been that we've done that for the longest time. So, for example, you take an epic like the Mahabharata. It started out as an epic called the Jaya, which was 25,000 verses long. Then it evolved over many, many years into another epic known as the Bharat, which was 50,000 verses long. And then that morphed into the Mahabharata, which was 100,000 verses long. Now, I don't believe that there weren't layers of fiction that were applied during that transition process. Similarly, if we take, for example, the Ramayana, what we are familiar with is the Tulsi Ramayana, which is the most popular version, in which Ram is deified as this god. But if you look at the Valmiki Ramayana, Ram is an ordinary mortal, a human being with lots of failings. And similarly, if we look at many, many other versions of the Ramayana, the Adbhut Ramayana, the Anand Ramayana, we have multiple versions of the story. So, for example, in one of the versions, it's Sita who manifests as Durga and kills Ravan. In another version, it is Lakshman who kills Ravan. There is a third version in which Sita is not abducted. There is a fourth version in which the abduction happens, but it's of Kaushalya. There is a fifth version in which it is Ravan who helps Ram perform the ceremonies that are required prior to battle. So there are so many versions. There are 300 versions of the Ramayana. The great thing about our country is we never said that your truth is less than my truth. All the 300 versions can be the truth. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said that a myth is a lie that reveals a truth. So we are not concerned with the absolute truth. We are concerned with the deeper truth.
An absolute truth exists at all.
At all.
So
Absolutely.
on that wonderful note, we are very happy, he'll be very happy to take questions from the audience. I think we have time for maybe 3 questions, which I'm sure you'll be happy to respond to.
My thanks to Madam Day. You have triggered lovely questions. I have one question for you, sir. When she said about theological thriller, what has prompted you to go for this? Thank you.
I must tell you, it's not only theological, because the first novel was a theological thriller, which was the Rosabal line. The second was a political thriller, because Chanakya's chant is much more about politics than theology. The Krishna Key was much more of a mythological thriller. The Sialkot saga was a business thriller. Keepers of the Kal Chakra is a philosophical thriller. So they are totally different animals in that sense. As far as the first novel, the theological thriller, the Rosabal line, it's not as if I set out to write a theological thriller. It's not as if when I sat down to start writing, I knew, oh, this is going to be a theological thriller. What I knew was that I had disparate strands of information. and I wanted to be able to connect them. And that's what I have found I'm good at doing. So for example, for me it's always a very fascinating question that there were trading links between the Indus Valley civilization and Mesopotamia. And in Mesopotamia, for example, we have the patriarch of Judaism emerging, which is Abraham. But for me, it's very fascinating that if I can take the A out of Abraham and put it at the end, I can get Brahma. And I wonder whether the word Brahm and Abraham are related. And then I think, and I dig a little deeper and I say, well, you know, it's not that crazy because Abraham had a wife called Sarah. And the consort of Brahma is Saraswati. So, where is there a connection there? And for me, it is those connections which make it very, very fascinating. And by the time that I was done writing the manuscript, my publisher, eventual publisher, turned around and said, this is India's first theological thriller. So the name tag stuck, but it wasn't as if I started out thinking that that's what I'm going to write.
Thank you. And one more question, the lady. Do you want to identify yourself, please?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Serish. I'm a third-year sociology student at Jadavpur University. And I firstly thank you for such an exciting session. I just wanted to know about what your take is on, the portrayal of women in the history of mythology. If you could just tell us how gender and women have been portrayed in all the, versions of mythology, I think that'd be really nice.
That's a question which probably, even if I sat here all night, I would not be able to answer. But let me just tell you this, that we have fundamentally, if you look at literature at a superficial level, it's a utterly misogynistic portrayal. When I wrote Chanakya's chant, I was surprised at some of the laws that the Arthashastra talked about. And mind you, the Arthashastra is a seminal work in that sense. But when it comes down to the status of women, Chanakya tends to come across as a complete chauvinist. Having said that, there is a deeper meaning in some of the passages which talk about the ultimate power of Shakti. And that is something which for me has been a big takeaway from all of the research that I have done. People ask me that, what do you think in terms of woman power or feminine power or the divine feminine? And I said, the truth is that in our world, we tend to think of concepts as dualities or opposites. So we think of light and dark, we think of hot and cold, we think of north and south, right? But the truth is that the two concepts are not two alternative concepts, it's the absence of one. So for example, darkness is the absence of light. Or for example, positive, where you have an absence of a particular energy. So absence of a positive creates a negative. Or for example, the absence of heat creates cold. And I believe that Shakti and Shiva are pretty much like that. That the absence of Shakti is what gives us Shiva. Shiva in itself cannot be explained. And that is what I have tried to bring out in all of the 4 or 5 books that we've forgotten it down the ages, but that is the true source of power. So if you read most of my books, the acknowledgements, the very last acknowledgement on the first page of each of these books is I bow my head to divine Shakti. If you have read Chanakya's chant, the entire chant is a Shakti chant, it's a Shakti mantra. And so I believe that over the years we lost that bit. So we only did a superficial reading. But frankly, if you look at most of our myths, even if you take, for example, the Mahabharata and look at the role of Draupadi, it is far from a suppressed or a woman who in some way is being, who doesn't have a mind of her own. Exceptionally strong woman. And those are the characters that we should make as our role models.
Thank you. Well, the last question, please, if there is one. If not, thank you very much. It was Brilliant, absolutely. You were fantastic.
Thank
A
you,
big
Shobhaa.
round of applause.
Thank you.
It was just, I can sense the energy, the way the people were listening to you. It was enthralling. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you for doing this.
No,
It's
my
such
pleasure.
a pleasure to be sharing the stage with you.